Coming up, we read the tea leaves of the 23-man roster as we wonder where will ultimately the Devils roster shake out ahead of the regular season kickoff on Thursday night. We dive in coming up next. Yes, sir. It's DPL, the Devil's Puck Luck podcast, where we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Danny McDonough. No time for pleasantries. We got to get rolling on this thing. As the 23-man roster is waiting for the New Jersey Devils, the regular season is waiting for the New Jersey Devils. And by all indications, Danny, it looks like two things are going to happen for two young players. First, with Simon Nemec, let's talk about him because he certainly had a great camp. Lindy Ruff said he had a very strong camp and has shown a lot of areas of improvement. And yet, it looks like your hedge, your fence sitting, is going to pay off as Nemec is likely to start in the AHL.
Well, you know how I am, man. We talked about this a bunch during the season. You and I differ because if he's not playing 80% of the games, 75% of the games, I wanted him in the AHL. You were okay with 1 out of 3 games. But it looks like the way Lindy Ruff is, the way he is, his coaching style, that he would not be playing every day or 75% of the time. So he made great development, this year in preseason, scrimmaging, playing with obviously the top guys. He's going to be a phenomenal player. But going back to what I originally said, I think this year in the AHL is going to be really beneficial for him. That being said, he would have probably made the team on other NHL squads across the league. I really do believe that. And the way this team is kind of positioned itself with the depth, it's okay to give him that year in the AHL. We can afford to do that because of the depth that we have.
Yeah, I think that somebody mentioned this too when they were interviewing Lindy Ruff, and he kind of highlighted. So he specifically talked about, let's say, to paraphrase him, a young defenseman. You want him to have different situational opportunities, things that you can manipulate more easily at the AHL level than necessarily at the NHL level. But someone also brought up how, has the success of the team also impacted the decisions that you make with players? And it's true, right? If this was coming to this year on what we thought was the normal original timeline of, hey, let's progress, let's keep developing, let's get younger, Nemec would probably be up here starting. But this is a team that has Stanley Cup, aspirations over the next year or two, and you need to make sure you feel secure with the veteran players.
Yeah, 100%. And the same thing, and we're going to talk about it, obviously, this episode goes with Holtz. It's if you're on a different NHL team and the team isn't as successful and doesn't have the expectations and isn't as deep as it is, we'd be talking differently. We'd be talking Holtz probably on the top line or two. We'd be talking Nemec in that, second or third pairing. But because of where we're sitting and because we are a true NHL contender for the Stanley Cup this year, I understand why everything is unfolding the way it is. And I've been a big proponent of this the entire time. I want him to play every day. I really do. Because Lindy Ruff said it great. He said it great. He wants him to be in uncomfortable situations, being down.
Nothing more uncomfortable than playing at 19 years old at the NHL level. I'll tell you that right now.
No, listen, it's a different animal. You know that. But obviously being that number 1 D-man in Utica is going to help him, I think, become a leader as well. I can see him being a captain one day, an alternate captain one day for this team. He's 19 years old. His two-way game is phenomenal, and we've seen it in the preseason that he's going to be a staple on this roster in the future. So I think it's okay that he's going to be playing in Utica. I understand why he is. I understand why a lot of fans are like, what are we doing? Why are we playing Brandon Smith or Colin Miller? I get it, but I see why it's happening and unfolding the way it is.
Yeah, we'll talk about those veterans here in a second. And I think the last note on Nemec, and we don't need to over debate this because we talked about it all off season. I think it's, if you believe that he would play every third day at the NHL level, I think the natural progression that midway through the season, we're talking about him playing 60 and 70% of the games, right? And listen, now you think about it as if, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And listen, maybe that's a part of this too. I'm always thinking about young players through the optimistic lens that it's going to progressively get better and better. What if Nemec were to struggle and you have to send him down to the AHL? Does it stunt his growth? Does it stunt his confidence? There are those things. Those things do matter, certainly. So we'll see how it plays out. And obviously, whether it's injuries, which we never want to see happen, or as we'll talk about Smith and Miller now, if they're not performing up to the level of expectation, you can certainly see a call up. I think you will see at some point here, even if it's just rest related. I still think Nemec gets some cup of coffee throughout this season just so that he kind of gets that taste. It's the acknowledgement of what Lindy Ruff said. He's shown growth from last year to this year. He said he showed growth over the course of camp. So you want to continue to build on that confidence. Although, by the way, Nemec said in his interview, not knowing for certain that he's going down to the AHL, he said, yeah, it's been a fun camp. It's been a good camp. And now the next thing that comes. So it's not like he is sitting here demanding or feeling like he's going to be slighted by not making the roster, though we're all obviously sure he wants to. Miller and Smith. Smith is going to get the nod here. I think we both agree alongside Luke Hughes, at least to start. Miller's the newcomer into this. We've batted around Smith. He has his frustrating moments. You want a veteran to play cleaner. Are you fine with this? Let's just put it that way. Knowing that Luke Hughes is on that third pairing and he's the offensive player, that you just want to have guys that have been around this team.
I think I'm in the a lot of people disagree, but I think Smith has played fine. I really think he's going to be all right. I think that he showed that he is a veteran guy that is going to be that stay-at-home defensive guy when he needs to be more physical on the puck. And
that's what he needs to be. If he's that, then it's cool. And don't get out of your lane, right?
And Devils fans too, are thinking a lot with their heart and not their head at times too. If you go back and look at the tape that you and I have consistently done, looking at the preseason, looking at the scrimmages, looking at what's gone on in the offseason too, Smith has been okay. He's been fine, and he is that sixth defenseman. That is his role as an NHL player. He's not going to be a number 3-4 NHL, pairing guy for, defenseman-wise. He's not going to be on that second pairing. He's going to be a third pairing guy, and he's going to come in and out with Colin Miller probably. But going back to your point, Nemec is the next guy up. He is the next guy up, and if there's an injury or someone is playing horrifically, he's going to come up. And going back to what you said with Luke Hughes last year, because you called it for the playoffs with Luke Hughes, that he needs to be in this lineup, when the Devils were down 2-0. And when he was inserted into that lineup, it was a jolt for this team. But that could be Nemec too, mid-season. If something happens mid-season and we see a defensive lapse, whoever it might be on defense, or we see an injury, Nemec could be that guy to change the structure, for that young pairing. Maybe Luke Hughes and Nemec do play, mid-season or toward the end of the season if we need to adjust things. So, I don't want to close the book on that. I agree with you that I think that he will be that next guy up.
And the reality too, you're talking about, you said the sixth defenseman. You're talking about a guy, when you call a player, he's doing fine, it's okay. That can sound inherently negative, but you have to set what the bar of expectations is. Brendan Smith need not be this dynamic player for the team. He needs to be consistent alongside Luke Hughes and provide stability. And that's the expectation for Miller as well. Coming up here in a second, let's run it up onto the offensive side, talk about what we're hearing looks likely when we look at the second and third line pairings, the injury obviously to Halla and how they'll make that adjustment on the fly, and some indications from Ruff that'll sound all too familiar for Devils fans. Before we do that, though, guys, gotta tell you about our friends over at DraftKings, and that is because you know that right now NFL season is going on strong, and DraftKings Sportsbook is hooking in new customers with that great offer of just $5 on any bet, and you're going to score $200 instantly in bonus bets, and DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of a sweetener offer every game day all October long. You get over there, man. What is it? We're going to have Monday Night Football coming up. If it's me personally, I wouldn't even touch this because I don't know what the Raiders coming out of concussion protocol. There's a lot of things happening with Garoppolo. It's just, don't touch the money. Don't touch the line. Find a better bet here somewhere on DraftKings, where they have plenty of offers for you. Get in on the game day greatness. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code
THPN.
He's there. New customers can score $200 instantly in bonus bets when you bet just $5 on the NFL. That's promo code
THPN.
Only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.100gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hills Casino and Resort, licensed partner of the Golden Nugget, Lake Charles. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Our friends to the north. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gambling resources. I got some resources, and they're telling me that things have evolved in an interesting way for the top two lines. Alexander Holtz has been playing on that top pairing, second line pairing with Timo Meier and Nico Hischier. He's looked okay. There's been some good, there's been some bad. The scoring's been there. The accountability, the responsibility, whether or not you feel like he's the best partner for those two. That's all debatable. But then Holla gets injured on that third line. And as Lindy Ruff indicated, it's going to open some things up here for the New Jersey Devils. They're going to be flexible. And in the last session, we saw Dawson Mercer get elevated. I have an issue technically with this, I think, but are you comfortable with what Lindy Ruff is saying with the understanding that you're dealing with an injury on the third line now?
Yeah, it's in what sense? With that things are going to get shuffled around? Or
Yeah,
that
that we're talking about going into the year and saying basically, hey, Dawson Mercer is going to get elevated, but we'll see in game. We could see pairings get a little bit shifted here. Holtz could be up or down, and we're getting that same kind of speak from Ruff. And guess what? It may have frustrated fans, but it worked last year. The results were there, and it led to a very successful playoff run for this team.
here's the interesting thing, right? I don't want to see him on the fourth line, Holtz. I think he's too good and too fast to be on the fourth line, and the fourth line has a specific task when they're on the ice, right? We know what they're going to do when they're on the ice. The third line, I still think that McLeod should be that center on the third line if Hall is injured. And you put Holtz with Palat and McLeod, I think that's a dynamic line. And you and I have been talking about it. I've always thought that Holtz should be a third line player. I still think he should be a third line player. Mercer is just phenomenal, and I wanted him on that second line. However, I did understand why Holtz would be on that second line to have playmakers like Nico and Timo, but I'm fine with it. Listen, this is Lindy Ruff. Adam, you and I know what he does. You know how he is. You know that he's going to continue to adjust on the fly, especially with one of his centers down, one of his important centers down who wins faceoffs. I think you're going to see a lot of in-game adjusting, especially depending on play. We could see a specific line in the first period that is completely jumbled up and different in the second period in the home opener. There's that chance when it comes to Lindy Ruff. It all depends on their play. I think the top two lines are going to be a staple, obviously with Nico, Timo, and Mercer, and then obviously with Jack, Jesper, and Toffoli. Did I say that right? Yeah. Yep. So those top two lines, I think are obviously going to be the staple.
I actually, you know what? If we wanted to go a step further here, before we talk about Lazar, who played in that final preseason game, shifted over into the center spot, expectations that he would fill that, as you mentioned there. Maybe it's McLeod that naturally would get elevated up there. But I'll say this, in game that would be interesting to watch for. We don't want to go a mile deep before we get to the regular season. I actually don't hate the idea that maybe Holtz rotates up later in the game and Dawson Mercer rotates down, because let's say the Devils, as we presume, are going to have games where they're leading, where they're dominating. Well, guess what? Now let's put that flying dynamic Holtz up there with Timo and Nico and see if he catches a spark and gets a goal, and bring Mercer into, when healthy, that Palat, Holla, and Mercer line. You go, now you guys go out there and you know exactly what your task is. We've heard this in some of the broadcasts where that could be maybe one of the best third line combinations in the NHL. And that's where I think actually Lindy Ruff's in-game flexibility would make a lot of sense and could actually be a dangerous weapon to work with.
I 100% agree with you. And remember, Holtz is going to get a lot of power play time too. Let's not forget about that. I think that's a big factor here coming into this season as well. No matter where he is on the first, second, third, fourth line, he's going to get PP time. It's just going to happen. To your point, let me ask you a question. It's an injustice, in my opinion, to put him on the fourth line. If Lindy Ruff has him on the fourth line, do you see this as a complete disaster and mishandling of Alexander Holtz if you see him on the fourth line?
Well, the one thing I will say is, I understand the confidence and trust in Dawson Mercer, and you can go ahead and rotate him up whenever you feel. But, I said I was fine with him being on that second line. You said you prefer him on the third. If the result is that he's going to start the season on the third, then he should have been playing all camp long on the third line. Because now you're talking about a player, again, had a bad taste last year. You want him to get his best foot forward. This could be his last really solid chance to make a great impression. Why not develop that cohesion? Why not develop that chemistry? Now you're almost putting him in a difficult spot. And to your point, if he starts on the third line and struggles, now down to the fourth line, I don't know if that's going to be the case. It might be more likely that it's the third line and then down to the AHL.
Here's my thing. I understand what you're saying, but he didn't do enough on that second line with Timo and Nico when he played with them. I just don't think he did enough.
And I'm not saying that he did. You can make that strong case, and that'd be fine. My issue would be, you put him there. Now, you want to say it was the sink or swim, prove yourself in camp. Okay. But if you're going to have my thing is, if you're going to have him on the roster, if he's going to have a role, then you should have just put him where you thought ultimately he was going to have the best get off start possible. If third line is where you think he'd be most comfortable, start him there. Let him play consistent there, right? Because now Now you've said we tried them all camp long on the second line, didn't look good enough. So now we're going to rotate. You're already knocking him, right? And I'm not, this is on him to perform, but now you're already taking a fragile guy who came off a bad, a opportunity last year and saying, and you weren't good enough this year either. Go ahead and try it on the third line. And while we agree Dawson Mercer's the better player, the more proven player, the more talented player at this moment. Mm-hmm. If you're Dawson Mercer, you don't care because I've already established myself. If you're Alexander Holtz, you whether or not you think it sticks in players' minds, well, I was taking 11 picks earlier than him in the same draft class, and now I'm getting put behind him in the pecking order. I hope that he takes it in stride, but we'll see, right? If the performance is there when you get to the regular season, it's all good. But I'm waiting with a little bated breath here on Holtz.
The mental factor is a huge thing to talk about. We haven't really talked about it too much. It's that it's a demotion in his mind. I'm getting demoted down to the third line because I wasn't good enough to plan the second line. And a young kid, to see how he handles it, it's going to be interesting to see. I still think you can get 15 to 20 goals on the third line. I think that we're undervaluing a little bit as fans what Palat and Haula, when healthy, what they can do with Holtz. Like, Haula is a phenomenal player at the faceoff dot. He's going to win faceoffs. He's going to win dirty pucks on the boards. Palat is a veteran, and he hits people. He has grit. He is an aggressive player. He's going to clear up some pucks, and Alexander Holtz can still get in that open area, and he can still bury goals. I'm still confident that Holtz can develop his game, and he can be a staple on this roster, and I see it being on the third line. And you know what? At the end of the day, you're scoring 15 to 20 goals on the third line. You're successful. That's fine. That's great.
Yeah, and I think we should still approach it that same way. Danny's expectation said, hey, I think he can score 15 to 20 goals this year potentially. The expectation hasn't changed. How he'll go about accomplishing that will look different. And arguably on that third line, maybe the defensive pressure and your awareness and what you need to be dialed into gets alleviated a little bit by a Palat, by a Haula, and depending on how they work the pairings when we talk about the defensive lines as well. All of those things, including the power play, are going to be what we watch for. The bottom line is we tried to stay on here. We're recording this live going past the 5 o'clock hour and not getting any finite information, just officially what the 23-man roster is going to look like for the Devils. That's okay, because we're going to come back in before the Monday night official season opener. We're going to talk about Devils. We're going to talk about the final 23. We're going to talk about what the opening roster looks like, what those lines look like. And then know that things are going to change. Things are going to evolve. While the expectations have risen this year for the Devils, I do think the process will not be entirely dissimilar, though we want more stability. Lindy Ruff is still going to, remember, Ball is a guy we got to watch here. We're all excited. He got elevated. Expectations on him as well. And I think we've almost looked past him because he was here and he played well and we believe in him. And we're talking about these other guys that are going to come up and down. But there's some other big names here we need to talk about along the way. Closing thoughts before we clear out of here, Danny.
This is going to be a phenomenal season. And I think everybody needs to take in stride what's happening with Nemec. It's not a bad thing for this kid to develop in the AHL. I've always been a proponent of that. I think him playing every single day in the AHL is an important thing. And I do agree with Lindy Ruff being in those uncomfortable situations and situational hockey. I think it's vital to his success, and I think that one day he can be a captain or an alternative captain for this team.
Yeah, that pairing with him and Luke Hughes is obviously the dream on all Devils fans' minds. When that comes to pass, hopefully sooner than later, but in the meantime, is preparing for what should be a deep, successful playoff run after a very long 82-game season that starts Thursday night. You get us over on YouTube at Devils Puck Luck. You get us on Twitter at NJDevilsPL, also at Danny the Face and at Adam Armbrecht. You get us on TikTok, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Facebook, all at
Devils Puck Luck.
You better believe it, guys. No big sign off here other than saying, let's get this ball rolling. We have been waiting for the start of the NHL season. We will have our official opening night preview before the Thursday night tilt. Until next time, guys, let's get after it.